The dust of forward operating base Erebus tasted of rust and regret. It coated everything. The HESCO barriers sweating in the Kandahar sun, the razor wire coiled like sleeping serpents, and the woman sitting on a discarded ammo crate near the perimeter. She wore faded jeans, scuffed hiking boots, and a plain gray jacket that had seen better decades. Her dark hair was tied back in a simple, functional knot, and her face was a study in stillness. She wasn't looking at anything in particular, yet her gaze seemed to absorb everything: the shimmer of heat off the runway, the posture of the guards in the watchtower, the rhythmic clank of a generator struggling against the oppressive heat. This stillness was an anomaly. FOB Erebus was a place of nervous energy, of young soldiers whose movements were either sharp and purposeful or jittery with unspent adrenaline. She was an island of calm in a sea of controlled chaos, and it made people uncomfortable. 2 military police officers approached, their boots crunching on the gravel with practiced authority. The younger one, Corporal Davis, had a chest puffed with the self-importance of a man given a uniform and a weapon. The older, Sergeant Chun, moved with a more weary, deliberate pace. "Ma'am," Davis began, stopping a few feet from her. His tone was laced with the kind of aggressive politeness reserved for unwanted visitors. "This is a restricted area. I'm going to need to see your credentials." The woman, Anya Sharma, slowly turned her head. Her eyes, a deep, quiet brown, met his without fear or deference. She simply reached into her jacket pocket and produced a laminated badge on a lanyard. It was a contractor's pass, generic and uninspiring. Davis took it, his eyes scanning the plastic as if searching for a flaw in the lamination itself. "Anya Sharma, logistics consultant, says here you're cleared for the administrative cantonment only. The flight line and perimeter are strictly off-limits." He handed it back with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "You're a long way from the coffee machine and the spreadsheets, ma'am." Anya took the badge without a word, her expression unchanging. She didn't offer an explanation. She didn't apologize. She simply returned to her observation of the perimeter. This infuriated Davis. He saw a civilian, a woman, who was not only breaking the rules but was doing so with a galling lack of contrition. "Did you hear me? You need to come with us. Now." Sergeant Chun put a steadying hand on his partner's arm. "Corporal, let's just escort her back to the admin building." He looked at Anya, his gaze more curious than hostile. "Ma'am, my partner is correct. This is not a safe area for non-combat personnel. We can show you the way back." Anya finally spoke, her voice low and even, devoid of any inflection. "I was told to wait here." "Told by who?" Davis scoffed. "The ghost of Kandahar? There's no one out here but us and the guys on the wire. No logistics meeting happens on a blast wall." "My instructions were clear," she stated, not as a defense, but as a simple fact. The standoff was broken by the arrival of a Humvee that screeched to a halt nearby, kicking up a plume of ochre dust. Colonel Madsen, the base commander, stepped out. He was a man carved from granite and regulations, his face a permanent mask of disapproval. He saw his MPs with a civilian and his scowl deepened. "What's this, Sergeant?" Madsen's voice was a gravelly bark. "Sir," Chin said, snapping to attention, "we found this woman in a restricted area. She's a logistics contractor. Claims she was told to wait here." Madsen's eyes, cold and gray as a winter sky, fell upon Anya. He scanned her from head to toe, the worn civilian clothes, the calm demeanor, the utter lack of military bearing. He saw a problem, a loose thread in the tightly woven fabric of his command. "A contractor?" he repeated, the word dripping with disdain. "Let me see your authorization." Anya handed him the same badge. Madsen barely glanced at it. "This gets you into the mess hall and the finance office. It doesn't get you a front row seat to our perimeter defenses." "Who gave you your instructions?" "They were delivered," Anya said. "Delivered by who? An email? A courier? A talking bird?" Madsen's patience was non-existent. He operated on a diet of reports, orders, and unwavering obedience. Ambiguity was a personal affront. "It was a verbal directive," she replied, her calm acting as fuel on the fire of his frustration. "A verbal directive from who?" he pressed, stepping closer. "Give me a name, a rank, a unit." Anya remained silent. Her instructions hadn't included providing that information. To her, the directive was absolute. To Madsen, her silence was insolence. "I don't have time for this," the colonel snapped. He turned to Davis. "She's in a restricted zone without proper authorization, refusing to identify her point of contact. For all I know, she's casing the base for the Taliban. She could be a spy, a sympathizer, or just some deluded thrill-seeker. It's a security breach either way. Arrest her." Sergeant Chun shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, perhaps we could just confine her to her quarters until we sort this out." "Sort what out?" Madsen roared, his face turning a blotchy red. "She's a civilian playing soldier where she doesn't belong. She's claiming to have orders she can't verify. That sounds a lot like impersonation to me. Cuff her. Take her to the command center for processing. I want a full interrogation. Find out who she is and what she's really doing on my base." Corporal Davis's face lit up with a vindictive smile. He pulled out a pair of zip-tie cuffs with relish. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for trespassing on a military installation and suspicion of espionage. Put your hands behind your back." Anya looked at Madsen, then at Davis. There was no flicker of fear, no hint of protest. She simply stood, turned, and placed her hands behind her back. The plastic cuffs were cinched tight around her wrists, biting into the skin. As Davis pulled them unnecessarily tight, her sleeve rode up slightly, revealing a sliver of dark ink on the inside of her forearm. He didn't notice. He was too busy enjoying the moment, pushing her forward with a firm shove. "Move it," he ordered. She stumbled but caught her balance instantly, her center of gravity low and solid. They marched her toward the command center, a windowless concrete bunker that served as the brain of FOB Erebus. Soldiers turned to stare, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and scorn. A civilian woman being arrested was a rare piece of theater. Inside the temporary holding area, a small, stark room with a metal bench and a single camera in the corner. Davis pushed her down onto the bench. "You can wait here until the colonel decides what to do with you. Don't get any ideas." Anya sat, her back straight, her cuffed hands resting in her lap. She listened to the sounds of the base beyond the door. The distant hum of a drone, the crackle of radios, the shouts of men conducting drills. She was a prisoner, accused of being a fraud and a spy, yet her breathing remained slow and steady. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. She just had to wait. The wait was not long. The first explosion was a dull, ground-shaking whump that rattled the teeth. It was followed by a second, much closer, the sound sharp and violent, cracking the air like a whip. The lights in the holding room flickered and died, replaced by the eerie red glow of the emergency backup system. Shouting erupted in the hallways. The high, frantic siren of an incoming rocket attack began to wail, a sound the base inhabitants knew as incoming. Corporal Davis, who had been standing guard outside her door, stumbled back into the room, his face pale. What the hell was that? Sergeant Chun appeared behind him, his sidearm drawn. "Mortars. Close. Get on the comms, now." Another explosion, this one deafeningly near, shook the entire building. Concrete dust rained down from the ceiling. Through the open door, Anya could see the command center descending into chaos. Analysts were diving under desks. Officers were yelling into dead handsets. "Comms are down," someone screamed. "Primary, secondary, everything. I've got nothing but static." "It's a complex attack," Chun yelled over the din, his professionalism taking over. "Mortars for suppression, followed by a ground assault. They're jamming us. Davis, seal the entrance. Nobody in or out." Davis, his earlier arrogance gone, fumbled with his radio, his hands shaking. He was young. He had never been in a real, coordinated attack. The drills had not prepared him for the visceral, bowel-loosening fear of being the target. Colonel Madsen's voice cut through the panic, strained but still commanding. Get me a sit rep. Where are the impacts? Where is the main assault coming from? Get the backup comms online. I want eyes on the wire, now. But his orders were being swallowed by the noise and the electronic silence. The jamming was professional, blanketing all frequencies. The mortar fire wasn't random. It was strategic. Anya could hear it, even from her cell. It was a classic walking barrage, designed to sow confusion and drive personnel away from the northern perimeter, which meant the main attack wasn't coming from the north. She sat perfectly still on the bench, her eyes closed. She wasn't listening to the shouts of the men in the room. She was listening to the battle outside. The staccato pop-pop-pop of AK-47s from the west. The heavier, slower thump-thump of a DSHK heavy machine gun from the southwest. The mortars were a distraction. The real threat was a pincer movement from the west. The tactical display in the command center, now running on a backup generator, was a mess of useless, blinking icons. Without real-time data from the perimeter sensors and radio check-ins, it was just a map. Sir, Tower 3 is not responding, an analyst shouted. Tower 4 is dark, too. That's the entire western flank. They're blind, Anya murmured to herself, so quietly no one heard. She looked down at her hands. The zip tie was tight, the plastic digging deep into her flesh. She took a deep, controlled breath, focusing on her right thumb. She had done this before in places far worse than this sterile concrete box. With a small, almost imperceptible grunt, she forced the joint. A sickening, soft pop echoed in the small room, a sound of bone and ligament yielding to will. The pain was a white-hot flash, but she compartmentalized it, pushed it into a box in her mind and slammed the lid. Her thumb, now dislocated, flattened. She flexed her wrist, pulling her hand against the plastic cuff. It was still tight. She needed more slack. She manipulated her palm, folding it, making it as narrow as possible. With a slow, grinding pressure, she began to work her hand through the loop. The plastic scraped skin from her knuckles. Blood welled, slick and warm. For a moment, it caught on the widest part of her hand. She paused, took another breath, and then pulled with a final, brutal jerk. Her hand came free. With her left hand still cuffed, she reached over and, with another sharp, practiced movement, snapped her thumb back into its socket. The pain was a dull, secondary echo now. She looked at the cuff still dangling from her left wrist. The metal bench she was sitting on was bolted to the floor. She noticed a small piece of retaining wire sticking out from the underside of the frame, used to hold a conduit in place. It was thin but stiff. She broke it off. Took a few seconds of wiggling the metal back and forth, but it came free. It was about 3 inches long. She held it in her bloody right hand, her fingers surprisingly steady. She inserted the tip into the small locking mechanism of the second cuff. She couldn't see what she was doing. She could only feel it. The slight give of the tumblers, the faint clicks. It was a cheap, standard-issue restraint. Took her less than 10 seconds. The second cuff fell away, clattering softly onto the concrete floor. Corporal Davis, who had been trying to get his radio to work, spun around at the sound. He saw her standing there, free, a piece of wire in one hand, her other hand bleeding. His eyes went wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "Freeze!" he yelled, raising his rifle. "Get on the ground. Now!" Anya ignored him. She dropped the wire and walked calmly out of the holding room and into the maelstrom of the command center. She moved with a purpose that was terrifying in its composure. The soldiers, the analysts, the officers, they were all frantic, reacting to the chaos. She was moving through it, her eyes fixed on the large, mostly useless tactical map on the main screen. "I said freeze!" Davis screamed, following her, his rifle trained on her back. Sergeant Chun moved to intercept, his own weapon raised, but he hesitated. There was something in the way she moved, an economy of motion that didn't belong to a logistics consultant. Anya walked right up to the holographic map table. Colonel Madsen was there, his face ashen as he stared at the blank spots where his perimeter defenses should have been. "They're using the mortar barrage as a feint from the north," Anya said, her voice cutting through the noise with impossible clarity. It wasn't loud, but it was pitched to carry. "The main assault is a pincer from the west and southwest. They've already breached the wire near Tower 4. The DSHK is providing suppressing fire from that small ridge at grid 047.219, pinning down the QRF." Madsen stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. "Who in the hell do you think you are? Get this woman out of my command center." But an analyst, a young specialist with headphones pressed to his ears, looked up. "Sir, I'm getting something," a hardline whisper from the motor pool. "They're reporting heavy contact from the west. They say the wire is cut." Madsen's head snapped back to Anya. "How could you know that?" "The rate of fire," she said, pointing to the map. Her bloody finger left a small smear on the screen. "The AKs are firing in controlled bursts, advancing. They're not spraying. They're disciplined. The heavy machine gun is positioned for a crossfire to cover their approach and pin anyone trying to reinforce this section here." She indicated a weak point between two defensive bunkers. "Your quick reaction force is taking cover, but they're pinned in a kill zone. You have to flank the machine gun. There's a dry wash here." She traced a line on the map that wasn't marked as significant terrain. "That will provide concealment for a small team to approach from the south. You need 2 men with a javelin. 1 shot. Take out the gun, and the pincer collapses." Her tactical breakdown was so swift, so precise, so utterly confident, that it stunned the room into a brief silence, punctuated only by the distant crump of another mortar. "She's right, sir," Sergeant Chun said, his voice low. He had lowered his weapon. "That wash. It's there. Not on the standard maps, but it's there. We use it for runoff during the rainy season." Madsen was frozen, his mind struggling to reconcile the civilian contractor he'd arrested with the battlefield tactician standing before him. His entire worldview, built on rank and regulation, was cracking. To trust her was to admit his own command was blind. To ignore her was to risk his entire base. "And the jamming?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "It's too effective to be a simple broadcast jammer," Anya said, her eyes scanning the ceiling as if she could see the radio waves. "It's adaptive, probably located somewhere elevated, with line of sight to the main comms tower. There's only one spot that fits," she pointed again. This time to a small, abandoned watchtower on a hill just outside the base's eastern perimeter, a relic from the Soviet occupation. "There. They've put a team there with the jammer. They feel safe because it's behind the main assault. They think you're too busy looking west to look east." "Get her out of here," Davis shouted, finally finding his voice again. "She's a prisoner. She could be feeding us misinformation." The argument was cut short by the command center doors being thrown open with such force they slammed against the concrete walls. General Sterling, the theater commander, strode in, flanked by 2 massive Special Forces operators in full kit. Sterling was on base for a surprise inspection, and he had been caught in the command bunker when the attack began. His face was a thundercloud. "Madsen, what in the goddamn hell is going on? Why is my entire command network dark? Why does it sound like World War III is happening on your doorstep?" Sterling's eyes swept the chaotic room, taking in the panicked analysts and the overwhelmed colonel. Then his gaze landed on Anya. He saw a woman in civilian clothes, one hand bloody, standing at his tactical map, with an MP pointing a rifle at her. He started toward her, his face contorting with rage. "And who is this? A tourist? Get her out of my sight, Colonel, or I'll have your eagles for a paperweight." He was almost upon her, his voice booming, when he stopped. He stopped so abruptly that one of his guards bumped into his back. His eyes had fallen on her right arm. Her jacket sleeve, torn slightly during her escape from the cuffs, had been pushed up to her elbow. On the pale skin of her inner forearm was a tattoo. It was not ornate. It was a simple, stark design in black ink. A stylized, wingless dragonfly, its body formed by a single, straight needle. Below it, almost too small to read, were 3 pinprick dots arranged in a triangle. General Sterling's face went from furious red to ghost white. The blood drained from it so fast he looked like he might faint. The air in his lungs seemed to vanish. He stared at the tattoo, his mouth slightly agape. The entire command center had fallen silent. The only sounds were the distant gunfire and the hum of the generator. The general's eyes lifted from the tattoo to meet Anya's. He saw the same calm, steady gaze she had given everyone else. But in his eyes, there was no confusion. There was only dawning, horrified recognition. He took a stumbling step back. He turned his head slowly toward Corporal Davis, who still had his rifle leveled at Anya's chest. A tremor of pure, unadulterated fury entered the general's voice. It started as a low growl and escalated into a full-throated roar that shook the very foundations of the room. "Soldier, drop your weapon." Davis flinched as if he'd been struck. "I said drop it," Sterling screamed, his voice cracking. He pointed a trembling finger at Anya. "Get those cuffs off her. Get them off her right now." Davis, utterly bewildered, stammered. But sir, she's a prisoner. Colonel's orders." "I don't give a damn about the Colonel's orders," Sterling bellowed, stepping forward and grabbing Davis by his body armor, shoving him away from Anya. He turned to the stunned room, his eyes wild. He looked at Colonel Madsen, who stood frozen in disbelief. "You monumental idiot! Do you have any idea who you just arrested?" He jabbed his finger back toward Anya, his voice dropping to a raw, intense whisper that was somehow more terrifying than his shouting. "That's not a contractor. That is Nomad Actual." The name fell into the silence like a stone. Nomad. It wasn't a unit. It wasn't a call sign on any official roster. It was a myth, a ghost story that senior NCOs told to scare new intelligence recruits. Nomads were the deniable operators of a blacker-than-black unit that had been officially decommissioned a decade ago. They were assassins, saboteurs, and tacticians who operated so far outside the lines that the lines ceased to exist. They were sent to fix problems that officially did not exist. They answered to no one except a handful of people whose names were never written down. They were considered extinct. The dragonfly tattoo was their sigil. A creature that spends years unseen beneath the surface before emerging, fully formed, for a brief, lethal flight. The 3 dots beneath it, that designated her as the unit's commander. Nomad Actual. The legend in the flesh was standing in their command center, with bloody knuckles and a cheap contractor's badge. Corporal Davis looked as though he might vomit. He fumbled with the cuffs on the floor, picking them up as if they were radioactive. Colonel Madsen stared at Anya, his face a mask of utter, soul-crushing humiliation. He had not only dismissed her, he had arrested a living ghost, a figure who held more operational authority in her little finger than he did in his entire command. Anya, for her part, showed no reaction to the revelation. She didn't smile in triumph. She didn't acknowledge the general's outburst. Her focus was absolute. She turned back to the tactical map. "General," she said, her voice still level, her tone respectful but brooking no argument. "The window to flank that DSHK is closing. I need a fire team. 2 men, javelin, nods. And I need a direct link to the pilot of whichever gunship you have on standby." Sterling snapped out of his shock, his own decades of command experience roaring back to life. He was no longer a theater commander berating a subordinate. He was taking orders from a higher authority, one defined not by rank but by a lethal, unparalleled competence. "You heard her," he barked at the room. "Get her a command headset. Somebody get me the Warlock pilot on a secure channel and patch it directly to her. Chun, find 2 of your best men, get them a javelin and get them to that wash. You will follow her instructions to the letter. Go!" The paralysis that had gripped the room shattered. People moved with a desperate, newfound purpose. An analyst ripped his own headset off and handed it to Anya. She put it on, adjusting the boom mic with unpracticed efficiency. Sergeant Chun was already out the door, screaming the names of 2 of his most trusted men. "Warlock 1, this is Erebus Command. Anya said into the mic, her voice transforming, shedding any last vestige of the quiet civilian. It was now pure command presence, crisp, clear, and absolute. I am directing your fire mission. Do you copy? The pilot's voice crackled back, confused. Erebus command, I was told you were dark. Who is this? This is Nomad Actual. I have eyes on your targets. Acknowledge. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, the pilot's voice came back, all traces of confusion gone, replaced by a stark, professional clarity. Acknowledged, Nomad Actual. Warlock 1 is on station. Send traffic. For the next 20 minutes, Anya Sharma conducted a symphony of violence from the center of the command room. She was no longer a woman in jeans but the calm, deadly center of a storm she alone could control. Warlock 1, I am painting a target for you. Grid 047.219 is a DSHK emplacement on the ridge. You see the tracers? Affirmative, Nomad. I have the gun. Do not engage yet. I have a ground team moving to flank. Your job is to suppress the infantry around them. Put a 30mm burst into the rocks 20 meters to their east. Keep their heads down. Copy. Engaging rocks. The distant, guttural roar of the gunship's cannon echoed through the bunker walls. Anya turned her attention to the hard line. Sergeant Chun, report. We're in the wash, ma'am. Chen's voice came back, breathless. We have a clear line of sight to the nest. Awaiting your order. Stand by, she commanded. She looked at the tactical map, her mind processing dozens of variables at once. The timing had to be perfect. Analyst, give me thermal from the eastern drone. The Soviet tower. Her image appeared on a side screen. A heat signature showed 3 figures inside the old tower, clustered around a piece of equipment that was radiating significant energy. The jammer. Okay, she said, her voice dropping slightly. Warlock, the infantry is suppressed. Chen, you are clear to fire. Fire for effect. Firing, Chen's voice replied. A few seconds later, a bright flash lit up the thermal screen from the west, followed by a massive, secondary explosion on the ridge. The DSHK emplacement vanished in a cloud of fire and debris. Target destroyed, Chun confirmed, his voice tight with adrenaline. Good kill, Anya said, her tone as calm as if she were complimenting a well-made cup of coffee. Now, Warlock, divert your attention. New target, Eastern Tower. Grid 112.845. 3 enemy personnel and 1 electronic warfare package. I want you to put a Hellfire missile through the main window. Nomad, that's danger close to the perimeter, the pilot cautioned. I am aware of the distance, Warlock. The angle is clear. Put the missile in the tower. Copy that. Hellfire away. Everyone in the room watched the screen. A tiny point of light streaked across the thermal imaging and slammed into the old tower. The structure disintegrated in a silent, white-hot flash. And at that exact moment, the static in the room's speakers died. The radios crackled back to life, filled with the frantic, relieved shouts of dozens of soldiers. Repeat, Tower 2 is secure. The enemy is falling back from the west. QRF is advancing. We have them on the run. Comms are back. All channels are green. The pincer had been broken. The command and control blindness had been lifted. The enemy, deprived of their heavy weapon support and their tactical advantage, was melting back into the desert. The attack had been surgically dismantled. Anya calmly took off the headset and placed it on the console. She turned and looked at Colonel Madsen and General Sterling. The entire room was staring at her, their faces a mixture of awe, fear, and profound respect. The arrogant Corporal Davis was pressed against the far wall, trying to make himself as small as possible. Anya simply nodded once to the general, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of protocol. Then she walked out of the command center, past the stunned soldiers, and back into the dusty morning air. The battle was over. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the eastern sky in hues of bruised purple and soft gold. The air smelled of cordite and cool desert sand. The chaos of the night was giving way to the quiet, exhausted work of the morning after damage assessment, casualty counts, and the reloading of magazines. Anya Sharma stood alone by the perimeter fence, not far from where she had been arrested hours earlier. In her hands was a standard M4 rifle, handed to her without a word by a master sergeant as she left the command center. With methodical, practiced movements, she was field stripping it. Her hands, one of them still caked with dried blood, moved with an intimate, fluid grace. The bolt carrier group, the charging handle, the firing pin, each piece was removed, wiped with a rag she'd procured from a maintenance kit, and laid out on her jacket in perfect order. It was a ritual, a way of centering herself after the controlled violence. Footsteps crunched on the gravel behind her. She didn't look up. She already knew who it was. General Sterling stopped a few feet away. He wasn't flanked by his guards now. He was alone. In his hands were 2 tin mugs, steam rising from them in the cool morning air. He held one out to her. "Coffee," he said. His voice was quiet, stripped of its command authority. It was the voice of a man speaking to an equal, or perhaps even a superior. Anya paused her work. She took the mug, her fingers wrapping around its warmth. She didn't drink, just held it, looking out over the wire, toward the mountains that were now emerging from the darkness. They stood in silence for a long time, watching the sunrise. The sounds of the base slowly returning to its routine hummed around them. There were no questions about who she was or why she was there. There were no apologies for the arrest. The events of the night had rendered all of that meaningless. Finally, Sterling spoke again, his voice low. "It's been a long time, Anya." "It has, sir," she replied, her voice just as quiet. We all thought Nomad was a ghost story now," he admitted. "That you were all gone." "Ghosts are useful," she said, taking a sip of the coffee. It was black and bitter, just the way she liked it. "People don't see you coming." He nodded, understanding completely. He knew he couldn't ask her about her mission. He knew she wouldn't tell him. Her presence here was an answer in itself. A problem was being fixed, a problem so severe that it required the attention of a ghost. The attack on the base hadn't been the problem. It had merely been a symptom she had been forced to treat. From across the compound, Colonel Madsen watched them. He stood ramrod straight, his face pale, his career flashing before his eyes. He had made the single greatest mistake of his life, and only the sheer, terrifying competence of the woman he had wronged had saved him and his command. He saw the easy silence between her and the general, and he understood. He was an outsider looking in on a world he never even knew existed. Anya finished cleaning the rifle. She reassembled it with the same quiet precision, the metallic clicks sharp and clean in the morning air. She worked the charging handle, checked the chamber, and flicked the safety on. The weapon was ready. Her work was not yet done. She looked at the general. "Thank you for the coffee, sir." "Anya," he said, his voice holding a note of concern. "Whatever you're doing out here, be careful." She gave him the smallest of smiles. It didn't quite reach her eyes, but it was there. "Careful is how you get old, General. I'm just trying to get the job done." She set the empty mug down on the ammo crate, picked up the rifle, and slung it over her shoulder. Without another word, she turned and began walking along the perimeter fence, heading toward the gate that led out into the open desert. The guards in the towers watched her go. The MPs she passed averted their eyes, their previous scorn replaced by a deep, unspoken reverence. They were parting for her, creating a path. She was just a woman in jeans and a worn jacket again, but now, everyone on FOB Erebus saw her for what she truly was. Not a contractor, not a prisoner, but a legend walking in the dawn, heading back into the wilderness to hunt monsters they could not even imagine.